The grand halls of the Xilari Palace were silent as King Vorthan sat on his massive throne, his piercing golden eyes staring at the woman kneeling before him. Princess Jayara, his only daughter, had been summoned to face her fate. She already knew what was coming. "You are no longer of value to the Xilari bloodline," Vorthan declared, his voice as cold as steel. "Your presence is a reminder of failure. A daughter who cannot bear children has no place in this court." Jayara did not flinch. She had heard this all her life. The royal healers had examined her when she was a child and declared her infertile. It was the one thing that defined her in the eyes of her people. No noble would take her as a wife. No warrior sought her hand. She was a burden, and now her father had found a way to rid himself of her. She was being given away to the humans. "The treaty has been signed," Vorthan continued. "You will live among the human colonists on the distant world of Terra 47. They will take you in as part of our peace agreement. You are to remain there and never return." Jayara clenched her fists. This was not exile, not truly. It was disposal. She was being cast aside like a worthless object. But she would not let him see her weakness. "As you command, father," she said, her voice steady. Vorthan did not acknowledge her words. He simply waved his hand, dismissing her. The guards escorted her out of the throne room, and as the great doors shut behind her, she took a deep breath. Her old life was over. Now she would have to survive in a world full of strangers. The human colony on Terra 47 was small but thriving. Unlike the rigid structures of the Xilari Empire, the humans had built a settlement filled with life, laughter, and warmth. They were a species that valued curiosity and creativity over hierarchy. As Jayara stepped off the transport ship, a small group of humans was waiting for her. The one who stepped forward was Daniel Hayes, a xenobiologist and one of the colony's leaders. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp but kind eyes. He studied her carefully, not with fear, but with curiosity. "Welcome to Terra 47, Daniel said. His voice was calm, as if he wanted to make her feel comfortable. "I did not ask to come here," Jayara replied, her tone emotionless. Daniel gave a small, knowing smile. "And we did not ask for an alien princess, but here you are." Jayara raised an eyebrow. The way he spoke was different from what she was used to. He did not bow, did not treat her like she was fragile. Instead, he spoke to her as an equal. It was unusual. "We have prepared living quarters for you," he continued. "It's simple, but it should be comfortable." She followed him through the colony. Humans moved around them, working, laughing, talking. No one bowed or whispered behind her back. They were too busy with their own lives to care. It was strange. In the Xilari court, every move she made was watched, judged. But here, she was just another outsider. Inside her quarters, the walls were lined with shelves filled with books, maps, and human technology. A window overlooked a vast green field where farmers worked the land. It was nothing like the grand palace she had grown up in, but somehow it felt more alive. "You will be free to explore," Daniel said. "No guards, no royal rules. Just life." She turned to him, frowning. "And what do you expect in return?" Daniel looked surprised by the question. "Nothing." Jayara did not believe him. In the Xilari Empire, nothing was given freely. There was always a price. But as she stood there, looking out at the human colony, she felt something unfamiliar. Possibility. For the first time in her life, she was not a princess bound by duty. She was not a failure waiting to be discarded. She was something else. And maybe, just maybe, she could find out who that was. Jayara had never known a life without strict rules and endless judgment. In the Xilari court, every word, every movement, every breath was measured. But here, in the human colony of Terra 47, things were different. For the first time, she was left alone. No guards followed her, no nobles whispered behind her back, and no one reminded her of her failure. It was unsettling. She stood by the window of her small quarters, staring at the vast green fields stretching beyond the colony's borders. Humans were walking in the open, laughing, talking, carrying supplies, fixing machines. They were not warriors, yet they did not seem weak. They were not nobility, yet they did not seem lost. She did not understand them. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Daniel Hayes stood outside, holding a tray of food. Thought you might be hungry. Jaira glanced at the tray. The food was simple: bread, a type of soup, and some strange fruits she did not recognize. I do not need a servant, she said flatly. Daniel smirked. Good, because I'm not one. Around here, we don't have servants. We just help each other out. She hesitated before stepping aside. He entered and placed the tray on the small wooden table. I know human food is different from what you're used to, but we tried to prepare something close to your dietary needs. Jaira sat down, studying the food carefully. The Xilari royal diet was precise, with carefully balanced nutrients. This food looked ordinary. Still, she picked up a spoon and tasted the soup. It was warm, different, not unpleasant. Daniel watched her reaction. Not bad. It is adequate, she admitted. He chuckled and leaned against the wall. That's the highest praise I've heard all day. Jaira narrowed her eyes at him. You are different from the others. Daniel shrugged. How so? You do not treat me like an outsider. You do not bow or show fear. I don't see a reason to, he said simply. You're just another person trying to figure things out. I think you've spent your whole life being treated like you were less because of what your people believed about you. Jaira felt something stir in her chest, something unfamiliar. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. She had spent her entire life believing she was unworthy, but Daniel spoke as if she was just normal. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. Exploring the colony. Over the next few days, Jaira observed the humans closely. They were nothing like the Xilari. They did not live under strict rules, yet they still worked together. Farmers tilled the land. Engineers built new machines. Scientists studied the local environment. There were no grand warriors or noble leaders, yet their colony thrived. She was most fascinated by their problem-solving skills. One morning, she watched as a group of engineers struggled with a malfunctioning irrigation system. The metal pipes were leaking, and the soil was drying too fast. In the Xilari Empire, the answer would have been simple: replace the system entirely, no matter the cost. But the humans, they experimented. They tested different materials, adjusted the angles, worked together, and debated ideas. Jaira found herself drawn to their process. She was trained in Xilari science, and without realizing it, she spoke up. The pressure valve is too tight, she said. If you widen the opening by 0.5 millimeter, the flow will stabilize. The engineers looked at her in surprise. Then they tried her suggestion. And it worked. Hey, that's actually brilliant, one of them said. Daniel, who had been watching from a distance, smiled. See, you fit in better than you think. Jaira wasn't sure what to say. For the first time in her life, someone had listened to her. A shocking discovery. But not everything in the colony was peaceful. One night, Jaira woke with a strange sensation in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her body. Her breath was shallow, and her skin felt different. She hurried to the colony's medical facility, where Daniel was working late. I need a scan, she said, her voice urgent. Daniel frowned but quickly activated the medical scanner. As the results loaded on the screen, his expression changed. Jaira watched his face carefully. What is it? Daniel hesitated. You might want to sit down. I would rather stand. He sighed and turned the screen toward her. Jaira, he exhaled. You're pregnant. Silence. The words made no sense. It was impossible. She had been tested countless times by Xilari scientists. They had told her she could not bear children. Yet here was the proof. No, she whispered. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. I don't know how, but you are. The scans don't lie. Shira's heart pounded. If this was true, then everything she had been told about herself was a lie. What did this mean? And more importantly, what would her father do if he found out? Shira sat in silence, staring at the medical screen. The words repeated in her mind, but they refused to make sense. You're pregnant. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake. She had spent her whole life believing she was infertile. The auxiliary doctors had tested her when she was a child. They had been certain. The royal bloodline had no room for uncertainty. And yet here she was. Daniel stood beside her, his expression careful. I know this is a lot to take in. Shira finally found her voice. Run the test again. Daniel hesitated. He had already checked twice. The results were the same, but he saw the look in her eyes. She needed to be sure. All right, he said. She lay back on the examination table, her breathing controlled, her face expressionless. The scanner hummed, sweeping over her body once more. A few moments later, the results appeared. The readings were clear. There was new life inside her. Shira sat up, gripping the edges of the table. How? Daniel crossed his arms. That's the real question, isn't it? He glanced at the screen. By all accounts, your biology should be incompatible with human DNA. But somehow, it's not just working. It's thriving. Shira's hands curled into fists. This means my people were wrong. Daniel nodded. Or they lied to you. That thought sent a chill through her. Had the auxiliary scientists known? Had they declared her infertile to push her out of the royal bloodline? To make sure she was never a threat? A storm of emotions churned inside her. Anger, confusion, disbelief. She had spent her entire life believing she was less, that she had no future. But here, on a foreign world, among humans, she had created life. The realization was overwhelming. A choice to make. Shira didn't leave the medical bay immediately. She sat there, staring at the floor, deep in thought. Daniel didn't push her for answers. He simply waited. Finally, she spoke. I cannot tell my father. Daniel nodded. I figured. She looked up at him. You do not understand. If the Auxiliary Empire learns of this, they will see it as an abomination. My father will not allow it to exist. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we don't let him find out. Shira let out a slow breath. It is not that simple. There are auxiliary spies everywhere. If word reaches him, she paused. He will come for me. Daniel met her gaze. Then we'll be ready. She studied him carefully. Humans were strange. They were not the strongest species, nor the most advanced. And yet, they never backed down. For the first time in her life, she was beginning to understand what made them so dangerous. The hidden threat. Days passed. Shira tried to act normal, but the weight of her secret was heavy. She avoided the colony's medical wing, not wanting to draw attention. But something felt off. She noticed unfamiliar faces in the colony, workers she didn't recognize. They moved differently, their eyes scanning everything too carefully. Her instincts told her they were not human colonists. One evening, as she walked near the main supply station, she felt someone watching her. She turned quickly, her sharp eyes scanning the area. No one. But she was sure of it now. The Auxiliary had already sent spies. She returned to her quarters, locking the door behind her. She needed to think. If they were already watching, then time was running out. She couldn't hide forever. The King's Wrath. Light years away, deep in the Auxiliary Empire, King Vorthin stood in his war chamber, reading a transmission. His fingers tightened around the datapad, his golden eyes burning with fury. The message was clear. The princess carries a hybrid child. His grip cracked the device. Impossible. The human colony had tainted his bloodline. His daughter, his discarded daughter, had proven him wrong. And for that, she would pay. The warship Zephyrian was the most feared in the Empire, a floating fortress armed with the most advanced weapons. It had crushed rebellions, destroyed fleets, and brought countless worlds under auxiliary control. Now, it would bring his daughter back, or it would erase the humans from existence. Vorthin's voice was calm but deadly as he spoke. "Send the fleet. I want her alive." His second-in-command hesitated. "And the humans?" Vorthin's eyes flashed with cold fire. "Burn the colony to the ground." A storm approaches. Back on Terra 47, Daniel and Jaira sat in the colony's central meeting hall. She had told him about the spies. He had gathered the leaders. The humans had one chance to prepare. "We can't fight them in open battle," said Major Reynolds, the colony's head of defense. "Their technology is too advanced." Daniel nodded. "Then we don't fight their way." The humans were known for their ingenuity, for thinking beyond strength and power. If they were going to survive, they needed a plan that the auxiliary wouldn't expect. Jaira spoke up. "If we can disable their landing systems before they arrive, they won't be able to deploy troops effectively." Reynolds frowned. "You really think we can outmaneuver auxiliary fleet?" Jaira met his gaze. "You underestimate what humans are capable of." Reynolds smirked. "I like her." Daniel leaned forward. "Then let's make sure they regret underestimating us." The battle for Terra 47 was about to begin. The quiet hum of the colony's power generators filled the night air. The people of Terra 47 continued their daily lives, unaware of the danger approaching from the stars. But inside the main operations room, tension filled the air. Jaira stood with Daniel and the colony's leaders, staring at the holographic display. The auxiliary war fleet was on its way. "Their lead ship, Zephyrian, is the size of a city," said Major Reynolds, tapping the map. "It could wipe us out in minutes." Jaira remained calm, though she felt a storm inside her. She had known this day would come. Her father would never allow her to live freely. "He won't leave without me," she said. "That is his true goal." Daniel crossed his arms. "Then we use that against him." Reynolds frowned. "You want to turn you into the bait." Jaira nodded. "It is the only way." Daniel shook his head. "No, we don't hand you over. We make him think he has control, and then we take it from him." Reynolds smirked. "Now that sounds like a human plan. A desperate defense." The colony had no warships, no heavy weapons, only small defensive turrets and personal firearms. They had brains, not brute force, and that had to be enough. Jaira and Daniel worked with the engineers to prepare traps, hacking into communication signals, disrupting auxiliary scanning systems, and setting up energy disruptors to interfere with landing sequences. "We can't stop them from arriving," said Daniel, "but we can make their landing as difficult as possible." The goal was simple: delay them, confuse them, and outthink them. Jaira watched as humans worked tirelessly, moving equipment, setting up barriers, preparing for the fight. This was what made them different from the auxiliary. They didn't blindly obey a ruler. They didn't wait for orders. They adapted, and Jaira was starting to understand that power. The arrival of the auxiliary. Hours later, the sky darkened as massive ships descended. The Zephyrian hovered above the colony like a metal giant, its energy thrusters glowing bright. Then came the warning message. "This colony now belongs to the XELARI Empire. Surrender the princess and avoid destruction." Jaira stiffened at the sound of her father's voice. Cold, commanding, absolute. Daniel's jaw tightened. "They think we're just going to hand you over." Reynolds scoffed. "They don't know humans very well." Then came the first wave. Auxiliary dropships landed in the fields beyond the colony, releasing elite soldiers in dark armor. Their weapons gleamed under the dim light of Terra 47's twin moons. The battle had begun, outthinking the enemy. The auxiliary were used to overwhelming their opponents with superior firepower. But this was different. As soon as the soldiers advanced, they ran into human tricks. Energy disruptors fried their targeting systems. Decoy signals sent them chasing ghosts. Booby traps in the terrain slowed their march. Jaira watched from a rooftop as chaos spread through the enemy lines. The soldiers moved in formation, but their commanders were confused. The humans were fighting smarter, not harder. "This is working," Daniel muttered beside her. "They don't know how to handle unpredictability." Jaira turned to him. "My father never expects his enemies to fight back in ways he cannot control." She smiled for the first time in days. The face-off. As the battle raged, a small, sleek transport descended near the colony center. Jaira's heart pounded as the doors opened. King Vorthin stepped out. His presence was commanding, his golden eyes burning with rage. He wore his imperial armor, a symbol of his dominance. His voice was cold as ice. "You have disappointed me for the last time, Jaira." The auxiliary soldiers formed a circle around him, weapons raised. Daniel stepped forward. "She's not going with you." Vorthin barely acknowledged him. "This does not concern you, human." Daniel didn't back down. "That's where you're wrong. You gave her away. She's not yours anymore." Jaira stepped between them. "You never saw me as your daughter, only a tool for your empire." Vorthin's eyes narrowed. "You are weak. You have let these humans corrupt you." Jaira clenched her fists. "No, they have shown me what true strength is." The king exhaled slowly. "Enough. You will return to auxiliary space. Now." Then his eyes flicked downward, toward her stomach, and realization struck. "You are carrying a child." Silence filled the air. Then, for the first time in his life, King Vorthin lost control. His face twisted with shock and fury. His voice became dangerous. "This is an insult to the auxiliary bloodline. A disgrace." Jaira's heart pounded, but she stood tall. "Then you should have left me to be forgotten. But you came for me. And now you must live with the truth." Her father stepped forward, towering over her. "I will erase this mistake." Jaira's hands tightened into fists. She could feel the humans around her, ready to fight, but she did not need them to speak for her. She met her father's furious gaze and spoke with strength. "I am not yours to command anymore." Vorthin's expression hardened. "Then you will die with the humans." He raised his hand, giving the order to attack. The final battle had begun. The air was thick with tension. The colony of Terra 47 stood on the edge of war. King Vorthin's golden eyes burned with fury as he stood before his daughter. His soldiers, fully armed, surrounded him. Their weapons hummed with lethal energy, ready to erase anyone who defied the Empire. Jaira did not move. She stood her ground, her pulse steady. Behind her, Daniel and the colony's defenders were ready, but they knew the auxiliary forces were too powerful for a direct fight. Her father's voice was like steel. "You have one last chance, Jaira. Return with me, and I will spare this colony." Jaira's fists tightened. "Spare them," she repeated. "The way you spared me." Vorthin's jaw clenched. "You were born a princess. You were meant to serve the Empire. Instead, you have disgraced it with this thing growing inside you." Daniel stepped forward. "Her child is not a disgrace." Vorthin barely looked at him. "Silence, human." Daniel didn't back down. "You threw her away. And now, because of your arrogance, she found something greater than your empire. A future without you." Vorthin's expression darkened. "Then she will die with you." And with one motion, he signaled the attack. The battle begins. The auxiliary soldiers charge, their weapons blazing. Bright energy blasts tore through the air, striking buildings, shattering walls. The colony's defense system activated, returning fire. Jaira moved fast. She knew auxiliary combat tactics, how they fought. But the humans had something the auxiliary did not: creativity. As the battle raged, Daniel and the colonists used traps, distractions, and unpredictable maneuvers to hold back the enemy. Explosive charges under key pathways forced the Xilari to scatter. Smoke bombs disrupted their vision, throwing them into confusion. Hacked signals made them believe reinforcements were coming. Jaira fought alongside the humans, using her knowledge of Xilari weak points to disarm and disable enemies. But the Zephyrian warship loomed overhead. Its weapons began to charge, aiming for a devastating final strike. If they didn't act fast, the entire colony would be destroyed. A risky plan. "We have to take out the warship," Jaira said, breathing hard. Reynolds, ducking behind cover, looked at her like she was insane. "That thing is a floating fortress. What do you suggest? We throw rocks at it." Jaira's mind worked fast. Their targeting system depends on the fleet's command relay. If we take out the relay, they won't risk firing. They might hit their own forces. Daniel's eyes widened. "That's actually possible." Reynolds muttered, "You both sound insane." Daniel grabbed a communicator. "Henderson, can you disrupt their command relay?" A voice crackled through. "If I can get close enough, I can jam it. But I need time." Jaira looked at Daniel. "We'll give him time." The showdown. As the battle raged below, Jaira and Daniel fought their way toward the relay station. The auxiliary soldiers guarding it were elite, but they did not expect human unpredictability. Daniel rolled under enemy fire, using debris as cover. Jaira moved with speed and precision, striking weak points in their armor. With each fallen enemy, they got closer. Then Vorthen himself stepped into their path. He moved like a predator, his royal armor gleaming, his energy sword crackling with power. "Enough," he growled. "This ends now." Jaira met his gaze. "Yes, it does." She launched forward, her movements faster than Daniel had ever seen. Vorthen blocked, countering with brutal strength. The fight was personal, father against daughter, empire against freedom. The battle around them blurred as the two clashed. Jaira was strong, but Vorthen was stronger. He struck her hard, sending her crashing into the ground. Daniel reacted instantly, firing at Vorthen. The king deflected the shots effortlessly. "You are nothing." Vorthen spat at him. "Just a weak, mortal creature." Daniel gritted his teeth. "Maybe." Then he grabbed a nearby energy detonator, one of the colony's makeshift explosives, and threw it at Vorthen's feet. Boom! The explosion knocked Vorthen back, giving Jaira the opening she needed. She lunged, striking his armor hard. For the first time, Vorthen staggered. He looked at his daughter in disbelief. "You would choose them over your own blood." Jaira's eyes hardened. "I already did." And with one last strike, she sent him crashing to the ground. The warship retreats. In the distance, Henderson's signal jammer activated. The Zephyrian warship's targeting system failed, forcing it to abort its attack. Confusion spread among the auxiliary soldiers. Their leader was down, their warship blinded. The humans, though outgunned, had won. Vorthen, struggling to stand, glared at his daughter. "You have no future," he spat. "You and that thing inside you." Jaira stepped closer. "We will make our own future." Vorthen's soldiers hesitated. Without command, they had no orders. The king growled in frustration. "Retaliate." The auxiliary forces withdrew, their warship rising into the sky. Vorthen, humiliated, left without his daughter. For the first time in her life, Jaira was free. A new beginning. The battle was over. The colony stood damaged but victorious. Jaira turned to Daniel. "It is over." Daniel exhaled. For now. They both knew the Xilari would not forget this. But for the moment, they had won. Jaira placed a hand on her stomach, a soft smile forming. Her father had tried to take everything from her, but she had something greater than the empire ever gave her. A future, a family, and a home. The Xilari warship, Zephyrian, disappeared into the dark sky, leaving behind the ruins of a failed invasion. The colony of Terra 47 stood damaged but undefeated. The air was thick with smoke and dust, but the fires of battle had finally died down. Jaira stood at the center of it all, her gaze locked on the sky where her father's fleet had vanished. He was gone. For now. But she knew her father never forgot defeat. He would return. Daniel approached her, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We actually did it," he said, half in disbelief. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "For now," he sighed. "You really can't enjoy a victory, can you?" Jaira crossed her arms. "My father does not accept failure. He will regroup. He will come back, stronger, with a larger force. He will not stop until he gets what he wants." Daniel held her gaze. "Then we'll be ready for him." She studied his face. Human determination. It was one of the things that made his species so unique. Unlike the Xilari, who relied on strength and superiority, humans adapted. They found a way to survive, no matter the odds. And now, she was part of that survival. Rebuilding the colony. The next few days were spent repairing the damage. Buildings were patched up, systems were restored, and injured colonists received treatment. Jaira worked alongside the humans. It was new to her. Royalty was never expected to do labor in the Xilari Empire. But here, she wasn't royalty anymore. She was one of them. She lifted metal beams, repaired broken circuits, and even helped plant crops in the damaged fields. At first, some colonists still looked at her with caution. She had been given away by her father like a piece of property. Some still saw her as an outsider. But she didn't let it stop her. She worked hard. She earned their trust. One afternoon, an elderly human farmer handed her a water flask. "You work harder than most of the men here," he said with a chuckle. Jaira took the flask and drank. Strength is not measured by power alone. The farmer nodded in approval. "You're more human than you think." The word stuck with her. A growing fear. But even as life returned to normal, a shadow loomed over Jaira's thoughts. The child inside her, the first of its kind. It wasn't just a child. It was a symbol of something impossible, proof that two different species could create life together. Her father had called it an abomination, but Jaira knew the truth. Her child was hope. She placed a hand over her stomach, feeling the warmth of new life growing inside her. She would protect this child, no matter what. But how? Her father would come again. The Xilari Empire would not forget this humiliation. Would she always have to run, always have to fight to protect her future? She had chosen her path. She did not regret it. But deep inside, a question lingered. Would her child ever be safe? The warning. Late at night, a message arrived, a distress signal from a hidden informant. Daniel, Jaira, and the colony's leaders gathered around the small screen in the command center. The signal was weak, the voice distorted. "They're coming back," the voice whispered. "The king has called for a new fleet. Bigger, faster. He won't let her escape this time." Static followed. Then silence. Jaira's heart clenched. Daniel clenched his jaw. "We don't have enough defenses to survive another attack like that. If they send more ships, we're finished." Reynolds, the military leader, cursed under his breath. "We need a new plan." Jaira took a deep breath. She had to think like a human now. "We cannot win in a direct battle," she said, "but we don't have to." Daniel turned to her. "What are you thinking?" She exhaled. "We make them chase us." A dangerous plan. Jaira outlined her idea. The Xilari Empire is vast, but its power is concentrated. It does not waste time on small colonies unless they hold great value. Daniel nodded, "Which means they're only coming back because of you." She looked him in the eye. "Exactly. So if I am no longer here, Terra 47 is no longer a target." Reynolds frowned. "You want to leave?" Jaira stood firm. "Not just me. We will take the entire colony into deep space. Make it look like we abandoned this world. If my father cannot find me, he will move on to his next conquest." Silence filled the room. Then Daniel laughed, shaking his head. That's insane. But it might work, Reynolds admitted. The plan was risky. Moving an entire colony through space was nearly impossible. Resources were limited. The journey would be dangerous. But staying meant certain death. Daniel turned to Jaira. You're really willing to leave everything behind? Jaira placed a hand on her stomach. This wasn't just about her anymore. I will do whatever it takes to keep this child safe. Daniel nodded, understanding. Then we better get started. The race against time. The colony's evacuation preparations began immediately. Ships were modified to carry more people. Essential supplies were gathered. Fake distress signals were sent to confuse the auxiliary fleet. They had only days before her father's forces arrived. Jaira stood at the edge of the colony one last time, watching the sky. This was her home now. But to protect it, she had to let it go. Daniel walked up beside her. Regrets. She shook her head. Only determination. He smiled. Good, because we're about to rewrite history. Jaira looked at the colony's people, humans, and her people's former enemies, working side by side to survive. She had found a new family, and she would protect them all. The auxiliary would never see it coming. The colony was a storm of movement. People worked tirelessly, packing supplies, modifying ships, and preparing for departure. They were about to leave everything behind, their homes, their farms, their carefully built lives on Terra 47. But it was the only way. Jaira stood at the command center, staring at the holographic star maps. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. If the auxiliary empire couldn't find them, they couldn't destroy them. Daniel walked up beside her, hands in his pockets. We're almost ready. Jaira turned to him. Are the people willing? He smirked. Willing? No. Terrified. Yes. But they trust the plan. Jaira exhaled. Trust. A concept that had never existed in the auxiliary empire. Rulers commanded, and the people obeyed. But humans, they fought together. And now, she was one of them. The final countdown. Henderson, the colony's best engineer, worked to scramble the auxiliary tracking systems. If we make it look like a reactor meltdown, he explained, they'll think the colony is dead. Jaira nodded. How much time do we have? Henderson wiped sweat from his forehead. Less than an hour. The auxiliary fleet would arrive soon. Jaira's hand instinctively went to her stomach. Her child's future depended on this. She would not let her father take that away. The last stand. As the last ships were being loaded, the sky darkened. The auxiliary warships had arrived. Jaira's heart pounded as the massive shadow of the Zephyrian covered the colony. A booming voice echoed through the air. This is King Vorthen of the auxiliary empire. You have something that belongs to me. Jaira stood at the edge of the colony, staring at the approaching ships. Her father was here. Daniel stepped beside her. Are you ready? She nodded. More than ever. A daring escape. The colony's defenses activated, firing small decoy missiles to distract the auxiliary fleet. Meanwhile, the main colony ships launched, heading toward deep space. The plan was working. But then, Vorthen's warship moved. HFY Stories, the escape ships. Someone yelled. Jaira's breath caught. If her father fired now, everything would be lost. She did the only thing she could. She stepped forward and opened a direct transmission to her father's ship. The confrontation. Vorthen's face appeared on the screen. His golden eyes burned with fury. You dare speak to me, he growled. Jaira stood tall. I am not afraid of you anymore. He sneered. You think you can escape me? You are my daughter. You belong to me. No, Jaira said. I belong to no one. Vorthen's lips curled. You carry a disgrace to our empire, a child born of weakness. Jaira smiled. No, a child born of something stronger than you'll ever understand. Vorthen's eyes flashed with rage. You will regret this." Then he raised his hand, ready to give the command to fire. Jaira acted first. She sent a signal, the one Henderson had prepared. And suddenly, the entire colony's reactor exploded. The illusion of destruction. The explosion was a trick, a carefully planned detonation designed to look like total destruction. From orbit, it seemed like Terra 47 had been obliterated. The auxiliary scanners picked up nothing. No life. No survivors. Vorthen froze, his eyes widening. What? He scanned the empty space where the colony had been. There was nothing left to conquer. No, he roared, slamming his fist on the control panel. He had lost her, and there was nothing he could do. A new beginning. Far from the battlefield, the colony's ships soared through space, hidden in the vastness of the stars. They had escaped. Jaira watched from the viewport, her heart racing. It worked. Daniel walked up beside her. "We did it." She turned to him, a rare smile on her lips. "Yes, we did." Daniel glanced at her stomach. "And now?" Jaira placed a hand over the new life growing inside her. "Now we build something new." She was no longer a princess of the Xilari. She was free, and she had a future worth fighting for.